Imagine choking on molten gold, liquid fire pouring down your throat, searing your flesh from the inside out, until your screams vanish in a cloud of steam. Now imagine this torture wasn't some medieval nightmare, but the punishment for a man who was simply too rich. Because even today, history's richest men can lose everything chasing glory, and sometimes the price is their life. In ancient Rome, gold wasn't just wealth. It was power, obsession, and sometimes a death sentence. Because for one man, Rome's richest, the very thing he craved most became the weapon that killed him. This is the story of Marcus Licinius Crassus, the man whose name became a synonym for greed, the man whose fate would help bring down the Roman Republic, and the man whose grisly death still echoes as a warning today. Some fortunes come with a price no one should ever pay, because what happened to Crassus will make you question how far you'd go for wealth. Long before molten gold burned through his insides, Crassus was just another young Roman noble. His family was wealthy, but not the richest. Not yet. Then Rome fell into civil war. Two powerful generals, Marius and Sulla, tore the city apart in a brutal fight for control. Heads rolled, entire families vanished, and Rome's skyline glowed red from burning homes. Most people tried to survive. Crassus saw opportunity. Whenever Sulla's enemies were declared traitors, their properties were seized and auctioned off for a fraction of their value. Mansions, vineyards, priceless artwork, gone in the blink of an auctioneer's hammer. And lurking in the shadows, Crassus bought it all. He turned blood into gold. By the time the dust settled, he owned swathes of Rome others could only dream of. But he was just getting started. Here's how ruthless Crassus was. Rome was a tinderbox. The city was packed with wooden tenements. Fires broke out almost daily. Crassus built a private fire brigade, 500 slaves armed with buckets and hooks. But they wouldn't rush in to help. Instead, they'd arrive at the flames and wait. Panicked owners begged for help as flames devoured their homes. And that's when Crassus would offer a deal. Sell me your burning property for a few copper coins, or watch it turn to ash. So yes, the next time someone tries to sell you fire insurance, remember Crassus. He basically invented it, except he set the fires first. Would you sell your home to save it from burning or risk losing everything you own? Once the desperate owners agreed, Crassus's crew put out the fire and the property was his. It was cruel, brilliant, and it made him richer than ever. But gold alone wasn't enough for Crassus, because in Rome, wealth could buy anything except eternal glory. And Crassus was determined to carve his name into history, no matter the cost. Crassus knew that to rule Rome, he needed partners. So he struck a secret deal with two men. Julius Caesar, charming, ambitious, drowning in debt, but destined for greatness. Pompey the Great, Rome's golden boy general, adored by soldiers and citizens alike. Together, these three formed the first triumvirate. It wasn't official, it wasn't legal, but for a few brief years, they were the true masters of Rome. Caesar wanted political power. Pompey wanted respect and rewards for his conquests. And Crassus wanted even more wealth. One place burned in his mind, like a vision. Parthia. Parthia lay beyond the Euphrates Rivera kingdom, brimming with silk, spices, and legendary treasures. Crassus believed conquering Parthia would make him richer than any man alive, richer than Caesar, richer than Pompey. Some whispered it wasn't just greed. Crassus was desperate to be remembered as more than the man with the biggest wallet. He wanted a triumphal parade through Rome with prisoners in chains and wagons spilling over with gold. But older senators warned him, Parthia is no easy conquest. Their cavalry rides like the wind. Their archers strike from nowhere. Crassus ignored them. He was 60 years old. He'd spent a lifetime gathering wealth. Now, he wanted glory. So in 53 BCE, he raised an army of 40,000 men and marched east into the blazing deserts beyond Syria. It would be the biggest mistake of his life. But what Crassus didn't know was that his thirst for gold would lead to one of the most humiliating defeats in Roman history and the death of his own son. Because waiting for him in those endless sands was a man whose name would become Crassus's doom. Sharina. Sharina wasn't just a general. He was Parthia's secret weapon, a master tactician, a showman who fought battles draped in jewels, towering over his soldiers and riding horses shod in silver, and the commander of a cavalry so fast, so deadly, it could strike and vanish before Rome's legions even turned their shields. As Crassus marched closer, scouts returned with chilling news. The Parthians are waiting, and they are ready. Still, Crassus pushed on, driven by visions of gold, and with every step deeper into Parthian territory, he led his army closer to one of Rome's greatest disasters. And what happened next would not only shatter Crassus's ambitions, it would forge one of the most infamous executions in human history. And by the way, if you think this story is brutal, wait until you hear about the Persian king who drowned his treasurer in molten silver, or the Ottoman sultan who executed his own brothers to keep his throne. But first, let's watch Crassus walk into hell. The desert loomed like an endless sea. Heat shimmered off the sand in blinding waves. Roman soldiers staggered under their armor, sweat pooling in their sandals. Still, Crassus pushed onward. He ignored the warnings of his scouts. He ignored the grumbling of his officers, because all he could see was Parthia's rumored wealth. Gold, spices, silk, enough treasure to make him not just the richest man in Rome, but its greatest conqueror. But what he didn't see was that every step he took was leading him deeper into Sharina's trap. The two armies met near a dusty town called Carrhae. Sharina appeared on the horizon, a glittering figure in gleaming armor, gems winking under the sun. His cavalry spread out across the plain like ripples on water. Crassus believed numbers would win the day. He had 40,000 men. The Parthians? Fewer than 10,000, or so he thought. But Sharina knew something Crassus did not. Mobility can slaughter numbers. The battle began with the Parthians firing arrow-hundreds, thousands, an endless storm. Roman shields bristled like porcupines. Men screamed as arrows pierced through gaps in their armor. Crassus ordered his legions into a hollow square. Shields locked. Spears thrust out. But it was hopeless. The Parthians unleashed their deadliest secret weapon, the composite bow. These weren't simple wooden bows. They were weapons of bone, horn, and sinew capable of shooting arrows that punched through Roman steel from incredible distances. And when the Parthians seemed to flee, Crassus fell for it. He sent cavalry in pursuit, straight into ambushes. Then came the moment that broke Crassus's heart and Rome's morale forever. Crassus's son, Publius Crassus, was young, brave, and eager to prove himself. He begged his father to let him lead the cavalry in a counterattack. Crassus relented, watching as his son charged into the swirling dust after the retreating Parthians. Hours passed. No sign of Publius. Then, the Parthians returned, riding slowly, with something grisly raised high on a spear. Publius's severed head. Blood dripped from his hair. His eyes stared lifeless into the desert sun. The Parthians jeered, waving the head for the Romans to see. Soldiers wept. Some vomited. Crassus stared blankly, as if he'd aged 20 years in a single instant. Night fell over Carrhae like a funeral shroud. In the Roman camp, silence reigned. No songs, no laughter, only the low moans of the dying. Crassus paced the sands, haunted by visions of his son's lifeless face. Some officers pleaded, "Let's retreat while we still can." But Crassus, broken, stubborn, hesitated. He still dreamed of salvaging victory, of returning to Rome with his pride intact. But Sharina was already closing the jaws of his trap, and by dawn the sands of Carrhae would drink deeper still of Roman blood. At first light, Sharina sent messengers under white flags, offering peace. He praised Crassus's bravery, promised safe conduct, offered to discuss terms of withdrawal. Desperate, Crassus agreed. He rode out with a small group of officers, stepping into the Parthian circle. Fine carpets were laid over the sand. Wine was poured into golden cups. Sharina smiled, his voice smooth as silk. "Let us talk like great men. No more blood." But behind that smile was a predator. Talks turned tense. Sharina demanded Rome surrender territory east of the Euphrates. Crassus refused. Voices rose. A Parthian noble grabbed Crassus's bridle. Roman officers drew swords. Chaos exploded. Parthian soldiers lunged forward, seizing Crassus, dragging him from his horse. His officers were slaughtered on the spot. The richest man in Rome found himself bound and captive, blood spattering his fine robes. But Sharina wasn't finished, because killing Crassus wasn't enough. He wanted to make his death a message. The Parthians led Crassus in chains through the desert, parading him before the troops. Some accounts say Sharina forced Crassus to dress in Parthian clothes, humiliating him as the soldiers laughed. Others claim Sharina staged a mock Roman triumph, with Crassus the star attraction. Then, in front of the entire Parthian army, Sharina gave the signal. Servants brought forth a massive golden bowl. Into it, they poured molten gold shimmering, blazing, white-hot. Historians still argue whether what happened next was real, or propaganda so shocking it kept Rome awake at night. Crassus struggled as soldiers pried open his mouth. And then, they poured liquid gold down his throat. But why molten gold? And did it really happen, or was it just Roman propaganda to paint their enemies as monsters? Stick around, because the truth might be more shocking than the legend. And by the way, if you think this is the worst fate Rome ever dished out, wait until you hear about the emperor who made senators suffocate in molten lead, or the king who walled enemies alive inside his palace walls. But first, we have to finish Crassus's story. The soldiers held Crassus fast, arms bound behind him, as the heat from the molten gold rippled through the desert air. Some said he screamed, gagging as the liquid metal touched his lips. Others claimed he clenched his jaw shut, defiant to the last, until soldiers forced open his mouth with iron hooks. And then, the gold poured in, a river of searing fire, flooding his tongue, his throat, his chest. His eyes bulged, his skin blistered. A sizzling hiss filled the air as molten gold met living flesh. Moments later, the richest man in Rome crumpled like a rag doll, lifeless. But Sharina wasn't done. According to ancient writers, he lifted the cooled, gold-encrusted mass that had formed in Crassus's throat and proclaimed, "Let him drink his fill of the wealth he so desired." Some accounts say Sharina fashioned Crassus's remains into a grotesque trophy, either a gold bust or a solidified mould of the gold from his Galetto display during Parthian celebrations. Fact or propaganda, one thing is certain. Crassus's death sent shockwaves all the way back to Rome. When word reached Rome, the city reeled. The Senate fell into bitter arguments. Families who'd lost sons at Carrhae demanded justice. Political rivals whispered that Crassus's greed had cursed Rome itself. The first triumvirate was shattered. Pompey and Caesar, once partners with Crassus, now stood alone, two titans, circling one another, suspicion blooming like poison. And just as some feared, Crassus's death became the first domino to fall in a chain of events that would plunge Rome into civil war. But the consequences of Carrhae didn't end there. Because the Parthians didn't just kill Crassus, they humiliated Rome itself. And, hidden inside this story, is one of history's strangest mysteries: Roman soldiers who may have vanished halfway across the world. In the chaos after the battle, Sharina captured Rome's most sacred symbols, the legionary eagles, massive golden standards carried by each legion, topped with wings outspread, glittering under the sun. Losing those eagles was more than a military disaster, it was spiritual devastation. Rome believed the gods themselves protected the legions. To lose the eagles was to lose divine favour. For years afterward, Parthian envoys would wave those captured eagles like trophies whenever they negotiated with Roman diplomats. So, after the disaster at Carrhae, the death of his son, and Rome's humiliation, Crassus found himself facing a fate more terrifying than any battle, an execution that became legend. It was a wound to Roman pride that would fester for decades. And then there's one of history's strangest mysteries. Some ancient texts hint that thousands of Roman prisoners from Carrhae were marched eastward, deep into Parthian territory. Chinese chronicles from the Han dynasty record strange mercenary soldiers arriving on their western bordersmen who fought in disciplined square formations like Roman legions. Could they have been Crassus's lost soldiers, marched halfway across the world, forced to fight under foreign banners, never to see Rome again? No one knows for sure, but it's a haunting thought that men who followed Crassus for glory might have ended their days speaking a language they didn't know, in a land they'd never heard of. But let's come back to the question burning at the heart of this story. Did the molten gold really happen? Because some historians say it's a gruesome legend while others insist it's the truth, and the evidence might shock you. Historians have argued for centuries over whether Crassus truly died with gold poured down his throat. Some say it's a Roman invenzione, piece of propaganda meant to paint the Parthians as savage barbarians. After all, Crassus's greed was legendary. The image of molten gold was the perfect poetic justice for a man consumed by wealth. But here's the thing. The Parthians were known for theatrical executions. They loved making political statements through gruesome deaths. Persian kings before them executed traitors with molten metal. Even later empires used similar punishments as a warning to others. So, is it possible? Absolutely. But molten gold or not, Crassus's story is a timeless warning. He rose from a minor noble to become the wealthiest man in Rome. He built empires out of ashes, crushed rivals with money, and shaped politics with gold. But in the end, none of it saved him. His greed led him into a war he couldn't win. His ambition blinded him to warnings, and his thirst for glory drowned him quite literally in the very gold he worshipped. Because sometimes, the thing you love most becomes the thing that kills you. So what do you think? Was Crassus truly forced to drink molten gold, or was it a story invented by his enemies? And how far would you go for wealth or power? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what side of history you're on. And if you want more stories of ancient greed, twisted betrayals, and royal executions, make sure you're subscribed. Check out my next video, The King Who Drowned His Treasurer in Molten Silver. It's even more shocking than Crassus's fate, and you won't believe how it ends. Or perhaps to the Ottoman Empire, where sultans murdered their own brothers to keep the throne. Either way, history is full of monsters who wore crowns. Thanks for watching, and remember, in Rome, and every empire since, gold has always been more than metal. Sometimes it's a weapon, sometimes it's a god, and sometimes it's a death sentence.